Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, you.
Hey, what?
Hey, you. Get off of my cloud. Welcome once again to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast, where each week we talk about, well, records. My name's Jim, and I'm a record store owner.
And I'm Steve, a record collector.
How's it going this week, sir?
I think it's going pretty good, besides winter's coming, but...
It is. It's fall. Halloween is fast approaching.
It is, yes. So
You spent some time in a graveyard.
I did. It was enjoyable. It was really peaceful there.
I bet.
Yes.
Everybody's just dying to watch your videos on YouTube, aren't
they? Yes, they were.
If you get a chance, look for Steve, and we have the links up in several places, but look for Steve's channel on YouTube. It's lots of fun every week.
Yeah.
But the graveyard was because you were talking about bands with dead or death in the title.
Yes, which I had a surprisingly large amount of them. I mean, it's like, wow, something's wrong here.
Are you all right?
Yes, no kidding. Boy.
Well, as far as getting off of my cloud, today the main topic is going to be talking about the Rolling Stones and our 5 favorite Stones studio albums. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that because, of course, this past week the Rolling Stones released their brand new album, Hackney Diamonds, to much acclaim, actually.
Yeah, I did listen to it on YouTube. I streamed it and listened to the album.
Okay, well, we can get into it. Is that on your top 5?
No.
Okay. All right. We've got plenty of others that do. But as always, because this is a vinyl community podcast, we like to talk about our recent pickups. And we do have a little bit of news on the flip side of that as well. But any good stuff this week?
Well, I was in Kalamazoo, and I was downtown eating, going back to my hotel, and the road takes me right by a record store. I want to ignore this and just keep going because if I go into a record store, I tend to come out with something. But I know I stopped, and inside on the wall, I found an original from the Saints, I'm Stranded. You know, the Australian punk group. And I mean, this is one of the greatest punk albums made. And I had the vinyl from my previous collection. I'd saved the vinyl. I just needed the jacket. Well, now I got the jacket plus another original. So I was super happy to get that, though. That it was on my I had a small list on my phone, and that was one of them. Then I went. My next night, I was over in Detroit, and I met up with another record collector. His name's Mike, and he watches my channel. We went out. We went to Flipside Records in Detroit, and then went out to eat. But when I was in there, I found from 2006 the Decemberist Crane's Wife.
Okay.
This is another one that I used to have a box set of, 5-album box set of it, but I saved the vinyl. But here was the original, at least the original albums from 2006. So I was excited to get that because I love that album.
Yeah, but you're kind of doubling down on some of these, it feels like, because you saved the vinyl, but now you're finding decent copies with good covers.
Yes, with good covers. So I'm like, yeah. So, I always say, so when I sell, you're going, not only will you get an original, you'll get 2 original albums plus a cover. I don't know.
You need to go start finding that cover. But that opens up a whole nother can of worms.
And it's really hard. I've been trying. It's hard. And then the other one I found in there was a group called the Dharma Bums. Do you remember them from the 80s?
I do remember the name. Not too deep into knowing what their sound or anything, but I remember the name.
Yeah, they're out of Portland, kind of garage rock, alt rock, and this was their first album that came out around the mid 80s. And I have another album of theirs, and they've made music throughout the years, not prolific, but it was just a fun pickup, really inexpensive.
Oh, cool.
How about yourself this week?
Just a couple this week. One was a new release, but a reissue of an older album by Dan Auerbach, who's the guitarist and lead singer for the Black Keys. Originally, he had released a solo album called Keep It Hid back in 2009. Well, just the past week or two, there was a reissue of that, colored vinyl variant, and I had not really listened to that before, but we had an open copy in the store, so I gave that a listen or two, and I'll be darned if that's not going to find its way into the we had to open it for quality control purposes part of the collection. So very neat stuff. It's a rock, it's a little blues, it's a little soul, but some acoustic-ish stuff. But I'm going to give it a few more listens. But just on the first one time through, I can tell this is something I'm going to have in the collection and enjoy it. The other one is kind of a novelty one. This week at the store in our vinyl drop, I put out a small clutch of, X-rated albums, comedy and parody albums that were a little more adult themed in some cases in their music and their words. But there was one, I don't really count that as an absolute, like an adult album. There were a couple of tunes on there that were a little more risque of sorts. But it's by a group called the Masked Marauders. And we had a couple of those in store, so I put one out and I kept one myself. It's just kind of fun music, but there's no information on the group whatsoever. This is their only release. So I had to do a little digging on this. And this was a joke/hoax band that was started in 69 by a writer from Rolling Stone magazine who wrote a phony review for a band called the Masked Marauders, which was actually one of those super groups, like a super session group that brought people together. And he made a joke about the Stones and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and a bunch of other well-known musicians came together under the Masked Marauders title.
Okay.
When actually it was just a bunch of studio musicians. So it's kind of an inside joke. The music is it's a little folk rock, a little classic rock sound, some psych sound in there, garage sound more than anything. The one song that leads it off that made me included in that batch of stuff I put out was a song called "I Can't Get No Nookie."
Okay.
it's a fun little tune, but then they've got covers of like the Duke of Earl on there, Season of the Witch from Donovan, and then there's other stuff on there called Cow Pie and I'm the Japanese Sandman. It's just very fun garage parody rock by a group that doesn't exist. So I guess between Spinal Tap and that, I'm covered with a few things. So those were a couple of fun ads.
That does fit right into your collection.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yes.
It does indeed. Before we get to the Rolling Stone stuff, there was a couple of other news items we wanted to bring up. One that caught your attention regarding a very popular website with independent bands and artists.
Yeah, BandCamp is in the news again. Last year BandCamp, they got bought out by a company called Epic, who is a video game company and the ones that made Fortnite, which is like the most popular game out there and kind of where they make all their money. They're into other things, but Fortnite keeps them afloat. So Epic bought them. Now suddenly Epic is selling them to another company called SongTrader. Now, just before Epic was going to sell them to SongTrader, they announced to BandCamp, we're going to lay off 16% of your workforce.
Wow.
So, and that's, the tech industry is laying off people everywhere. So SoundTrader now bought this, BandCamp. Now, Epic also now owns part of SoundTrader. So they asked to be, so they kind of got in and bought some shares of SoundTrader. So they kind of have their hands in that company still, but SoundTrader is the one that owns BandCamp. So SoundTrader, they bought them, and just this last week they said, and this is a quote, after a comprehensive evaluation including the importance of roles for smooth business operations and pre-existing functions at SoundTrader, 50% of BandCamp's employees have accepted offers to join SoundTrader. Now they say 50 have accepted offers. Here's the thing. They only offered it to 50% of the people.
So that 50% that didn't accept the offers
wasn't given one.
They're
yes,
gone.
But it sure sounds a lot more positive the other way. Now, BandCamp had formed a union this year.
Okay.
At the beginning of the year. So the union's, it's trying to put a stop to this or say, what are we, can we prevent this from happening or find ways to get these people other jobs? But now, so BandCamp had 850 people working for them.
That's a big cut.
It is. And so 16% went, and then half of that went. So it was a huge cut, and it went into all areas. But one of the big concerns is part of BandCamp is every week they put out, it's on BandCamp, you can see where they have editorials about all the new music, and they really go into it. And they have, I think, 6 editorial writers. I think it got cut down to 2 or 3.
Wow.
That's it. Plus, it's just servicing the people. It's become such a great site for the independents, to put out your music. And the independents or the labels that are on there, they make a lot of money because BandCamp only charges 15%. And somehow, BandCamp's been afloat. They've been doing good. But now Epic and Soundtrade says, well, we've looked at this and they're not financially good. And so we need to cut these costs, which begs to make you wonder, does that mean even that 15%'s not going to be around? Are they going to charge these people more? I mean, there's that possibility. The other thing is BandCamp used to have BandCamp Friday. Every Friday you would go on to BandCamp and everything would be on sale. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen every Friday anymore.
Wow.
And it kind of started during the pandemic, but it's now been kind of pulled away, and it was a way for people to get into it. I mean, I use BandCamp to buy albums that I can't find anywhere, obviously CDs, and it is a huge, huge, big thing for streaming. And what BandCamp has looked at is, or what a lot of these companies have looked at is, there is what they call the super fan. And the super fan will buy anything from a group. And they say there's a 128% probability that a super fan will buy whatever that group puts out. So it becomes a whole big database about these people.
Oh, yeah.
And
so
what they do.
Information is money in this case.
Yes, a lot of money. And so what was interesting, though, is that none of the major, shall we say, music companies like Universal and that, none of them offered to try to buy this. I mean, they didn't look at trying to buy this up, which was really, to me, kind of odd. They just, they bypassed it. And even like Spotify could have looked into this. Hey, maybe doing something more, but they didn't. And Songtrader, what they do is they allow, it's a company that allows musicians and publishers to upload music that can be licensed for commercial entities such as brands or even content creators like on TikTok.
Or podcasters as well. Interesting.
Yeah. Yes. So it's really looking at it. The other kind of interesting, if you want to really get into the conspiracy, is Epic Games, which did invest into Songtrader. 40% of Epic Games is owned by Tencent Holding, which is a largest Chinese music organization, and so also this Tencent Holding owns 40% of Epic Records, 20% of Universal. They own shares in Spotify and the JV label. So this big Chinese conglomerate has its hands all over this, and of course, it's all the information in that. So I don't know. Very kind of interesting. It's you hope nothing's going to happen to BandCamp because it's been so. I mean, all these people, even our friend Michael, he puts his stuff out there, and it's a way for them to try to sell music, but not have to put it into a store or go digital.
These indie artists, I mean, this is an important revenue stream for so many. And I know lots of other bands locally here that rely on BandCamp. They will get paid more per stream than they would from Apple or any of the other ones if their stuff even makes it onto those other streaming services. Mm-hmm. Plus, they can sell the physical entities through BandCamp, like you said. And I've bought a couple records through BandCamp before as well. And that was really a great way to make sure the artists get the money and it doesn't go up that corporate ladder.
Yeah. Wow. And so now with corporations becoming a part of this, what's that mean for pricing and everything else? Because everyone wants their piece of the pie.
Yep. That's why we're paying $75 for reissues.
Yes.
Like we talked about last week.
Yeah, no
Holy
kidding.
cow. All right. Well, that definitely bears watching down the line. So. All right. One of the other things, and this was an article from a website called Rumor Mill that was brought to our attention from our producer, Kim. Thank you very much on this. She found an article, the top 25 vinyl albums sold year to date. So the first 3 quarters of 23 are in the books, and we do have some hard numbers on what the sales of these were. Now, this, I think, will come as no surprise to anyone whatsoever, unless you've been living under a rock on Mars, is that Taylor Swift is dominating this top 25 chart. She has 3 of the top 5 sellers so far this year, and out of the top 25, 7 spots belonged to TS. And that could change with next week's release of her 1989 Taylor's version as well, which that's a whole nother. I don't want to get into that today, but so, really quickly, let's run down this list. Number 1 is Taylor Swift Speak Now. Again, these are year-to-date 23 sales only, so January through now. Taylor Swift Midnights is number 2, so she's got the top 2 spots. Taylor Swift Folklore is number 4. In between those is Travis Scott and Utopia. And then Lana Del Rey, did you know there's a tunnel under Ocean Boulevard, is number 5.
Yeah, surprised on that one. I wonder why she's charging a whole bunch more money for her new next cover.
Yes, it's about it. Most of this top 25 list, this does speak well, I think, to the future of vinyl collecting, that these are a lot of new artists that appeal to younger listeners. Mm-hmm. So it takes all the way up until number 8 before we get to our kind of music, get off my lawn. There's a Fleetwood Mac Rumors that hangs on on there at number 8, followed immediately by Taylor Swift. Lana Del Rey at 9 and 10. Taylor Swift Evermore at 13. Melanie Martinez has got 2 in there. Nope, 1 in there. Michael Jackson Thriller at number 15, still hanging on. That's, I think, interesting as well. Yeah. And then number 17, and I think this is bolstered by the 50th anniversary, is Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon as the 17th top selling in the first 3 quarters of 23.
Tyler, the Creator's in there for 3.
Yeah, I see that too. Yep.
Too. Wow.
So again, lots of other stuff. The Taylor Swift Red at 19, Taylor Swift Fearless, Taylor's version at 20. 22 is a surprise, Queen's Greatest Hits.
Yeah, I would not have expected that.
Well, and it's the greatest hits, so folks want to dig through that. And we've talked about greatest hits albums and the benefits and pitfalls thereof. There was one big surprise for you on here as well, right? Number 25.
Yeah, Bob Marley and the Wailers Legend, which is greatest hits for Bob Marley, but it's still doing number 25.
Wow. So with the exception of those 3, 4 older artists, the rest of that top 25 chart is dominated by younger artists than those that appeal to younger artists, and absolutely dominated by Taylor Swift.
Yeah, that was really interesting, and it is good to see new people in there buying it. But there's just certain artists that are really fueling this.
And again, we'll have to see. Taylor Swift's 1989 Taylor's version is due for release this coming Friday. We're recording this on Sunday, the 22nd, the 27th of October, and I've got a bad feeling about this. This has happened a couple times, one with a previous Taylor Swift release, 2 smaller indie stores where just somehow we just don't get them shipped in time to hit the release date. But, don't worry, you can still pick them up at the corporate big box stores. I don't want to... You talked about the conspiracy theories earlier. Yeah. I'll toss that one on there. Mm-hmm. This happened with the Rolling Stones this past week, and there were some folks ticked off about that. I've got just kind of a bad feeling from some of the stuff I'm seeing that they're going to try to hold shipment on the Taylor Swift under the guise of, we don't want this released, even though this is just a rehash of an album that's she's done before. But we want to make sure that this isn't sold early. And you small indie stores, we can't trust you to do that. So we're going to hold shipping to the very last moment. And that's all well and good, but a store like ours, 2-day shipping from wherever it is. So if they don't release it till Thursday, that means we're not going to get it till Monday. And I don't open till Wednesday, so...
Well, and it was like that Rolling Stone where they said, well, you can do air freight.
They did give us a choice.
But there goes the whole profit margin.
Yep. I was given the choice for this new Rolling Stones Hackney Diamond. For whatever reason, again, as a smaller store, I cannot buy directly from the labels. So we go through a one-stop, a distributor who buys big quantities from the labels and then sends them out in turn to the smaller record stores around the country. The distributors did not get their copies of this new Rolling Stones until Thursday in some cases. So then I was given the choice, like you were saying, well, do you want to pay the overnight freight? You can have it on Friday. Otherwise, you have to wait until next week to get it. And so I paid for that because I didn't have a whole lot of them ordered. And granted, we went through them. It's a popular album. But even then, our store opens up at 11 Eastern. I didn't get it until 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And it was still, that's a big part of your profit margin.
Yeah.
It takes away. So suddenly you can either raise the price for the air freight, but then you're not competitive with everyone else. It really is sad.
And I'm not saying, again, that this is a conspiracy, but it's very odd that this only happens to these huge releases that have major, major pull, and then somehow the little stores don't get theirs in time, but don't worry about it. The big stores and the box stores have theirs just to get you covered, leaving basically everybody out but that super fan that you talked about.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with Taylor Swift this week, but we'll update next time we talk and see how that goes. So on the subject of the Rolling Stones, Hackney Diamonds was a big release, very in demand. Folks are talking about that. And these guys have been around forever and a half. I mean, look at Keith Richards. He taught Willie Nelson how to play guitar, as that meme goes. Not quite, but... So Steve and I got talking, and we're thinking, okay, so with a band like the Rolling Stones, with such a rich history, dating back to essentially the early 60s in some formations of that, mid-60s by 65 at least, they've got, hold on, let me call this article up here that's got the actual numbers that we can talk about. The Rolling Stones, over the years, have released 31 studio albums, 13 live albums, 28 compilation albums, 3 extended play releases, EPs, and 122 singles, and then combine that with 31 box sets, the various compilation box sets throughout there. So with a catalog that rich and deep, you'd think that, is this a major part of a lot of folks' collections? I'm not the biggest Rolling Stones fan in the world. I like them. I enjoy them. I have several in my collection. So what are our favorites out of that? What are the go-tos that you go to when you're in the mood for some Stones?
Yeah. I like you. I like the Stones. They have a lot of great songs, but I really don't pull them and play them that often. So start at 5 and work up?
We can do this. Now, just to be clear, Steve and I have not shared our respective lists with each other, so there may be some combinations on here. One thing that we did agree on, though, was to limit this to studio albums and not the compilations. And I do go to I will admit, I go to the compilations because it's got many of their albums have 1 or 2 absolutely fantastic songs. And then the others are good to marginal, and there's 1 or 2 that are just, wow.
Yeah.
What were you thinking? So we decided to exclude compilations, and that takes out a couple of big ones like Through the Past Darkly, Big Hits, High Tides,
Hot Rocks,
Flowers, the Flowers.
Yeah.
So that pulls a lot of them out of here. So we had to do our work on this to say what are our top 5 favorites. I'm going to go chronologically. I don't know. Did you kind of go in that direction too, or?
I went from 5th right down to my favorite.
So why don't you go ahead and start, and we'll see where we compare here.
Okay, so my 5th, number 5, was Aftermath. That came out in 66. And on there, they did have Paint It Black, Mother's Little Helper, and Under My Thumb. 3 big, really strong songs. They also did Going Home, which was an 11-minute long song, which was rare for that time. I mean, that was just, people have to go, what is going on here? Because in 66, no one was putting out that kind of jam on there. But they did it. Maybe it goes on too long, possibly. But it sure opened up the door for Iron Butterfly.
It did, yep.
Hey, how long can we go? So, there's some other songs. It can be inconsistent at times, but with the power of those 3, wow, that was something.
Aftermath is on my list. I probably would have put that at about number 3 or so.
Okay.
3 or 4. But this also struck me because this is the first Rolling Stones album that is all Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
So much of their earlier stuff, especially their first 2 albums. Now, the other thing that we have to kind of interject here is the fact that up until a certain point in the 70s, there were different versions released for the UK and the US. And so that may affect some of this. I think most of mine are going to be US versions. I don't know if I have 1 or 2 UK. But this one was the first album in their discography where all of the music was written by Jagger Richards. Yep. A lot of the other stuff was maybe blues, covers, or other soul covers that they had done. That one, Under the Boardwalk. It was just,
Oh
that
my-
really
it-
kind of
yes.
sticks in your craw hearing them sing this, because it's almost like they didn't care.
And I like that album till Under the Board. There it is. A song that can tank a whole album from last week. Under the
Which
Boardwalk.
one was that on? Do you remember offhand?
It was their second album, 12 by 5.
12
I
by
think.
4.
12 by 4, yeah.
Yes, there it is. 12 by 5.
12 by 5.
You're right. Sorry about that. Yeah, Under the Boardwalk comes along. You're like, what?
Exactly.
Okay, so we are in agreement. Rolling Stones Aftermath, released in 1966. There is a UK and a US variation of that. But yeah, I agree with you. The songs in there, Paint It Black, especially, such a powerful track to kick off an album that is truly Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
What do you got for number 4?
All right, number 4, Exile on Main Street, that came out in 72. A 2 LP set, which it could have been higher, but it's just like, oh man, 2 LPs. There's a lot of good music, but I just don't always like 2 LPs. But on there, they had just the incredible Rocks Off, Tumbling Dice, Happy, that has some of the best horns going on,
Yep.
and Turn and Frayed. And when I listen to this, really it's Richards and Taylor. Their guitar solos and riffs are incredible. Also, they've been trying to do country music or country stuff. This one comes together, and I think these songs are more cohesive and really sound great. A lot of people say that's the best Stones album of all time, which I can see why. For me, 4.
Okay, so Exile just missed for me. I mean, that was probably about number 6 in there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like to take into consideration, too, the music, of course, is absolutely paramount important. But I also like the collectability of some of these, and I'll get to this with some down the line. I factored that into my list.
Okay.
And Exile, that to its credit, there is a certain aspect of that has made that album tremendously collectible. A, it's very difficult to find in great condition. But B, the original pressings contained 12 postcards kind of tossed in there together. And if you find them with 12 postcards, you've got yourself a very valuable album. Much like, posters from Floyd or anything else, people will tack them up. Well, the postcards, people would rip them apart and send them or do whatever they want with them. So it's very rare to find an album intact with the postcards in there. So that one was close. I agree with the music on there was fantastic, but it just kind of missed a little bit for me. Replaced by number 4 for me was Between the Buttons from 1967.
Yeah.
There you get Let's Spend the Night Together. Ruby Tuesday is on here. She Smiled Sweetly is just, I think, a very emotional and it's a touching Stone song that kicks for me. Miss Amanda Jones is a rocker and a half. That kicks it out of there as well. But I mentioned Ruby Tuesday in yesterday's paper. I think this one cohesively comes together as an overall great Stones album.
Yeah. By the way, do you have the postcards in Exile?
I do have the postcards. I do have my copy has all 12 I think it's 12 postcards all in one continuous sheet. I did manage that at some point in my collection.
Someday you need to go on a vacation and say, Steve, do you want to watch the store for a week?
You're going to start sending me postcards.
Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Put a stamp on this. It's worth almost as much as the stamp you're putting on it now. Okay, number 3 for you?
Yep, number 3 is Rolling Stones Now. And I think it was their third album, came out in 65. So here is what you were talking about. This is a lot of blues and soul covers. It is filled with them, but my God, are they good? You have, everybody needs someone to love.
Yep, great soul tune on there.
Yes, and they do wonderful with it. Mona is a Bo Diddley song, which they kill. Little Red Rooster from Willie Dixon. Brian Jones plays the slide guitar on that, and he gets it. You could hear they worship. Jagger's voice has a bluesy sound. But it's not Howlin' Wolf going on here. Yeah. But the guitar work is so good on that. And they do Chuck Berry's "You Can't Catch Me." They do 3 original songs only. Heart of Stone actually made it to number 20, but I found this is I love the early Stones, But as we discussed, you get something like Under the Boardwalk that just kind of sinks it, because I was looking at that album and then I hit that song and go, nope, forget it. But this one was more cohesive.
Yep.
And it's just how they worship that early stuff I loved.
Okay, number 3-ish for me and through here, and this is where I really get into the collectability factor with the music, is Sticky Fingers from 1971. Okay. You've got songs in there like Brown Sugar, Wild Horses. Again, I think these guys by this time had mastered that idea of the album, the ebb and tide of the mood of an album that starts off strong, gives you a little bit of softer stuff, kicks you back in there with Can You Hear Me Knockin'. By the time they get to Bitch on side 2, they're just really driving that home. And then Sister Morphine. Dead Flowers is, I think, probably one of my favorite Stones tunes, and especially other cover versions of it as well. Has been some fantastic covers. But the thing that really sells this one for me is the Andy Warhol designed cover with the actual zipper on there. Now, this, as speaking as a collector and a record store guy that finds these things from time to time, you find them in various states of curiosity, zipper integrity, I guess is the best way to put this, because people would get curious. Okay, so what is under this? You can unzip it, but you can't really see what's behind it. So people would rip that to see Andy Warhol in his underwear. Yeah. Is that Andy Warhol, I think, in there? I think it was.
I think so.
He modeling the underwear. Yeah. There was, I think, originally some very, like almost a cloth version originally I'd read. I've never seen one like that, but I think that I'd read that there was something along those lines. But you get almost that secondary cover, but in doing so, in exposing that, pun intended, you destroy part of the album cover. So I've seen this in various states. You know that it's under there. It's like the Beatles Butcher cover. You know it's under there. Yeah. Do you disturb it just to get your jollies to take a look at Andy Warhol's underpants? Uh-huh. But the one thing, and this is, I pass this on whenever I sell a copy of this to somebody that has that original zipper cover, I say, make sure that when you put this on your shelf or in your crate, you've got a thin piece of cardboard, because whatever butts up against that zipper will indent that record that's next to it. And I've seen plenty of other Rolling Stone records that have a divot, and I'm like, oh, this was right next to a copy of Sticky Fingers. You're damaging that other cover unless you put something to protect that little, and it's a real zipper. It's an actual metal zipper that will, so that's a very cool marketing technique. But for me, that's on my top 5.
And Jim did tell me to do that. And yes, I do have a piece of cardboard in there. So yes, I listened. That doesn't happen a lot. All right, number 2 is the very first Rolling Stones album I ever bought, Some Girls, that came out in 1978. And wow, to me, it brought rock to the disco dance floor. That's what it did. I'm in college, and disco is big. The discotheques, even in Nebraska, they are there. And you have Some Girls, which was just this disco blues thumper that everybody would go out there to dance, even at the college dances. Boy, Some Girls would bring them out there. But you have like When the Whip Comes Down, which is very sexual and seedy, quite honestly, and Just My Imagination, which really they deconstructed the Temptations song and made it their own. I mean, it's such a good sound. Faraway Eyes, which is a wonderful country parody. Yes. I mean, it is so darn funny.
Well,
just send me some money. And then Beast of Burden, which is just a great ballad. It really says a lot of good in there, and it was almost my number 1 album, because I love it so much, but it was the first Stones album I ever bought and listened to.
I am going to, here we are, number 2. I agree with you completely. This is on my list as well. Okay. Some Girls, everything that you said musically, I will agree with. It's just got some great flow to the album as well. But I'm going to also go back to the collectability on this. If you have delved into the collectible side of this album, you know that there are multiple different variations of the cover that determine its value. And this goes back to the under construction cover, which is probably the more common one that you see, because there's actually like colorful holes in the die cut cover. And that is a result of the original cover, where they used now if you're familiar with the die cut, there's faces all throughout the album cover that are on the inner sleeve that are visible through the die cut on the outer sleeve. They didn't get permission to use the actresses' faces in a lot of these, and there was actually a lawsuit. Well, it was legally challenged by Lucille Ball, Farrah Fawcett, Liza Minnelli, who was representing Judy Garland, her mother, Raquel Welch, and the estate of Marilyn Monroe threatened to sue for use of the likenesses on that inner sleeve visible throughout. So under threat of that lawsuit, the label then pulled it and replaced it with just colors that said under construction. So when you find that original version with the faces, and it's actually called the faces version, that typically tends to be worth a little bit more because of that whole controversy surrounding that. So in my collection, I've got 2 copies. I've got the faces and the under construction version. But it even goes further because there's different color schemes for the Rolling Stones logo and different color schemes on the cover. This is kind of going what we did with the Police and how difficult that is to track those down. So for my collection, this tells you how much of a geek I tend to be with collecting. I made sure that my faces and my under construction cover of Some Girls had matching color schemes in both the font color and the color scheme on the front.
Well, that is good for you. Now there's a collector.
It took a few years,
Wow.
but I finally nailed it. But I agree. This is a great one. Music as well. Beast of Burden and Shattered. Shattered is one of the great ways to end an album of all time.
That is.
Okay, we are to number 1 now.
We're to number 1.
Wow.
And
Okay, what do you got?
I have Let It Bleed that came out in '69. Brian Jones was on 2 tracks, and then in came Mick Taylor. But wow, it's hard rocking, but they're also starting to bring in their whole demonically sexual stuff. They're going into that territory with this. You have Gimme Shelter with its apocalyptic lyrics, Midnight Rambler, which is just a harmonica-driven masterpiece. My God, they play that thing. You can't always get what you want, which is really kind of the Stones' version of Hey Jude when you think about it. It's the last
that's a
song.
good point.
Yes, they did it. Well, we got to have one. Love in Vain, which is the Robert Johnson song, and they do a wonderful cover of that, which I thought was wonderful. And then there was Cousin Boogie. I think Cousin Boogie was Casino Boogie. Casino Boogie. It's written by the Stones, but it's pure John Lee Hooker. You hear that, and it has that Hooker beat, boom, 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 just going. It's a great song. So yeah, that finally beat out Some Girls.
That one was very close for me in the top 5 as well, but I'm going to go a completely different direction for number 1, simply because this has some emotional connection to the high school era, to the radio era for me, being the old radio guy. But this one was their foray into a lot of almost top 40 and MTV era. I'm speaking, of course, of 1981's Tattoo You.
Okay.
Lots of great radio hits on this, but musically, this album kicks off with the song Start Me Up, which is just a staple for, stadium crowds or whatever, football game. But it's a great way to start an album. The music video, again, back to my early days of MTV, is horrible. They didn't care what they were doing when they did the music video, but it was important to see the Stones performing this a la lip syncing or whatever. But then you get things like Hang Fire, Little T&A with Keith Richards singing on that, as well as his guitar. Neighbors as far as a jam goes. And then they wrap the album up with Waiting on a Friend, a nice mellow way to kind of end that. Yeah. And I think it really bookends the album nicely between Start Me Up and ending on Waiting on a Friend. It's one of those albums that is well-rounded. But for me, this was my high school era.
Yeah.
And part of the memories is that this was a time when in the rural areas of outside of Lansing, Michigan, where I grew up, cable television was not a thing until somebody got one. Somebody got some cable television. So I remember this big deal going over to her friend's house and watching the HBO concert of the Rolling Stones performing a lot of their Tattoo. It was the Tattoo You tour that was being broadcast on HBO. And it was an event because not only were I get to see the Stones playing this, but here's this magical thing called cable television that brought this right commercial free into a home for us to enjoy.
That's neat.
So it's a memory aspect in me with this as well as a musical one.
When I was in high school, the big event where you would go over, someone got in Pong. That game where it's just a little dot pinging from one side to the other. And we're all just memorized by, wow, look at that. Wow.
So those are each of our top 5s. We agree on a couple of them, but you had some great ones. And like I said, there was a couple that came close for me, but they had to be edged out for other reasons, as stated.
I understand.
What about the other end of the spectrum? Uh-oh. Do we dare end on? No, we don't. I've got one thing to end on that's more positive than griping.
Well, just real quick, I did listen to their new album, and I will say I thought there was a lot of great guitar licks in there.
Yep.
Right? There was just some real good stuff going on. Jagger's voice to me sounded old. I mean, well, he is old.
He is, yeah.
Yeah, and I could feel it. I thought the slow when they were doing their faster paced songs, I could see how some of these could become hits. Some of their slower stuff, which there seemed to be more of, it was I wasn't as sold. I don't know if I will purchase this one or not, but there was some songs I would download. A lot of times, though, of these, you have to download the whole album to get it. I don't know. So it's one I'll listen to it a few more times.
I'm with you on that. I have to listen to it a few more. The stuff I've heard I liked, but I don't know if I really like it enough. And this current trend with a lot of these older artists who do sound old. I mean, there's no escaping the fact that these guys are approaching 80 or into their 80s. Mm-hmm. Keith Richards is, 211 by now?
Yeah.
But they bring in guest artists. McCartney's on this, Lady Gaga, Stevie Wonder, playing the piano. And that's cool that they can bring in their friends to do stuff like this, but it's almost like it's a crutch sometimes. And I'm not being mean to this album. It's a great album. I'm just saying that this seems to be a trend with a lot of older artists. Elton John did this. A lot of folks are doing that, bringing in other artists to help bolster up the sound of that album.
And the other artists are excited to do it because they're going to work with a legend.
Yeah, you bet.
I may never get this chance again. Yeah, you're right. You may never get the. I mean, they brought in Paul McCartney. He might be older than they are.
He could be.
Wow. But yeah, it's
so jury's out on Hackney Diamonds. I'll give it a fair shake. I'm very curious to delve into it a little bit deeper, and I will. We'll have an open copy here at the store. So,
but for a Stones fan, it's a great that it's there for them. Yep. Here's a chance to hear some brand new material, and that's exciting.
Opposite end of the spectrum for me, though, and I got to get this out there, is 1976's Black and Blue. That's the one. Hot stuff, but Cherry O Baby. I like the song Cherry O Baby, but it's just not really it's the Stones, but I don't know. This one never really. Fool to Cry, maybe a little bit, but the rest of it is just not memorable.
I never even brought it back in my collection. You're right. The one for me, it's a live album. Got Live If You Want It. It came out in the 60s, where it's supposed to be live, but they had some studio stuff where they put on screaming people. My God, that thing's awful. When I bought that, I go, this is like one of the worst things I've heard.
And it's mixed so poorly that the screaming almost overpowers. And they were doing that, I think, to really, again, you would bring up the Beatles and the screaming stuff on the Beatles. I think that was their answer to that one.
I think so.
What about compilations? Because I've got one I need to end with here, and I'm only doing this because this is that vinyl community where you show off stuff and you go, look what I got.
Yeah, for me, their best compilation still Hot Rocks, 64 to 71. That has all those great hits on albums where they had all the covers going on. Here, we're going to take out the plums and put it there for you.
That's a good one. My compilation is it's called a Special Radio Promotion Album in Limited Edition, Not for Sale. That's the actual Discogs title on this. This was a 1969 release to radio stations only. Ended up with a copy from one of the collections we bought several years ago. Recognized it for what it was. We're talking, it's got Route 66, Walking the Dog, Susie Q. So it's got some of the covers and stuff on there. Under My Thumb, Stupid Girl, Sympathy for the Devil, Prodigal Son, and Love in Vain. This is just a radio sampler sent out, and it's tremendously rare and tremendously valuable. The copy I've got is beat to hell. The cover is barely held together. I had to kind of pour it into a poly sleeve to keep it in one because I didn't want to tape it. The vinyl is good, but not great. But this is such a rarity, and my proclivity for liking promotional releases and stuff. Discogs has this thing. It starts right now at $500 on that, and it's topped out previously at $2,800.
How exciting.
So from a collectability side, this is one I like in my collection. I've played it once or twice, but it's so fragile that I'm very hesitant to do much other than to say, check this out.
I have a few Zamrock albums like that.
Oh, yeah.
You're almost scared to touch them. They're going to fall apart.
So, wow. but fun nonetheless. And this is why we collect, because it's exciting to find stuff like this.
It is.
So what are your favorite Rolling Stones? Where does Hackney Diamonds rate, or do you need to give that more time like we do? Yeah. We would love to hear from you on this, and to help, because we've been questioning how you comment other than on the YouTube side. But to help with this matter, we have launched a Facebook page. That will, I think, allow folks a chance to interact with us. Steve just found out about this not too long ago. So, but if you just do a search, and we'll put up links on the YouTube, we'll put up links on the podcast page as well, and Spotify. But if you just search Facebook, and it will be on Instagram as well by the time you hear this, for Two Guys Talking About Records, we will post the episodes up on there as well, and it'll give us a chance to answer any questions you may have and interact with you when we ask you questions like, what are your top 5 favorite Rolling Stones records?
What a wonderful idea.
Indeed. Wow. We also had a request to step up our Spotify playlists a bit too, and to give, since we do this podcast, just us talking, again, we're talking about records, we don't include sound bites because of the copyright issues. We want to be able to steer clear of that, because that allows us to reach more people. And if we include sound bites, as you well know from YouTube, that hinders your reach a lot of times. So we'll work on the Spotify playlist so you can listen to some of the things that we talk about. We'll work on that, we promise.
Yes.
Down the line. But in the meantime, this Facebook page, Two Guys Talking About Records, will be active as you're listening to this. So check that out, look for it, find the links, and that gives you a chance to communicate with us. You cool with that?
I think that's one. I'm glad Jim takes care of that kind of stuff. He just knows that it's above my pay grade.
So let us know what you think about the Stones. I'm curious too. I mean, the initial pop coming with Hackney Diamonds was so tremendous, and I think that's what led to the delays in shipment. And you said you talked to another record store owner who was feeling that with this as well.
Yep. Yes, exactly.
So we'll see what happens, as we will with Taylor Swift. But down the line, who knows? This is a lot of fun.
Yep, it is.
Well, you have been listening to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast brought to you each and every week by Jim, a record store owner,
and Steve, a record collector.
Two guys who really talk about records.
A lot.
A lot. All right, you folks have a great one.